Welcome to the Exceptional Sales Leader Podcast with Darren Mitchell. If you're a sales leader looking to take your leadership to a whole new level, then this is the podcast for you. We'll be exploring tips, techniques, and strategies to help you take your leadership to the exceptional level and allow you to enjoy more money, more meaning, and better sales results. Welcome back to the Exceptional Sales Leader Podcast, and my absolute pleasure to speak to a man coming in just north of Miami, wearing a magnificent white hat. He looks more like a pro golfer, just got to say, with that beautiful Nike hat, the symbol on the front called Tribble. And by the way, it looks like you got a golf shirt on as well, Sunil. So I must say, you're not a pro golfer. You're in fact the CEO and founder of Tribble. An AI-powered platform transforming how enterprise sales, marketing, and product teams scale and automate their go-to-market knowledge and workflows. Mate, it's an absolute pleasure to welcome you to the podcast.
Thank you for having me. And Darren, I've played golf exactly once, so I'm happy I
Once?
looked the part.
Was that in a corporate day?
It was actually. It was an investor day that a lot of portfolio companies got together, and I got to experience it for the first time. But I will say we won the scramble. Our team won, which was great. So I
Wow.
got to take home a prize.
Sensational. And I
Yeah.
used to love those. We used to do those on a regular basis. And did you get to play with a pro, or a pro started to go through the different groups?
No pros, but almost everyone there was really good, and it's great for a scramble because how bad you are gets really masked by the team that you're surrounded with. So I was happy to be taken along for the ride.
It's almost like the singer that's part of the choir that individually doesn't know how to hold a note, but within a choir, they're actually got everybody around them that sounds fantastic, which amplifies how good
That's
they are
exactly right.
potentially.
Sometimes you just go with the flow. It's
Mate, love that. So, hey, looking forward to this conversation. You've got a pretty extensive background in go-to-market, and you've been at some big organizations. Love to talk to you today about what you're doing at Tribble, but also this world of sales and go-to-market, and particularly how AI is continuing and will continue to impact what we're doing in a sales perspective. Just before we get into that, love for you to give us a little bit of background in terms of what you've done and how you started out and what specifically has led you to do what you do today.
happy to, Darren. I like to think back to when I started my career. I was an engineer. The first job I ever had was at SAP. I was coding software. I think I left university and started coding at SAP in a language called ABAP, which felt like I went back in time 20 years from the latest technology at that time.
Yeah.
This is around 2007. And that really was my first foray into enterprise software. I spent 3 years as an engineer building stuff and not really understanding the scope and breadth of it. At that time, it turned out to be software for the CPG vertical. So it was like a deep, very specific B2B process for retail and CPG companies that's not
Hmm.
very well known. And as an engineer, you don't really understand the business process that well, especially when you're fresh out of school. So that went on for a few years. Then I got a chance to get in front of a customer because they put me as a developer at a customer in the
Okay.
US, and I was kind of given as a loan. This is before people started talking about forward deployed engineers. This good old, hey, we've got a developer, we can put them on site if you buy our new stuff. So that's exactly what happened. And that was the first time I got to interact directly day to day with a customer.
Okay.
Realized very quickly that was more exciting than being locked up in the factory, right? So then I switched to consulting, and that was, for 5 years, I was traveling the world and implementing that same software that I had built at some of the largest enterprises in the world, a lot
Mm.
of the CPG companies. Fast forward to 2015, I had an opportunity to switch to Salesforce, which is up and coming, and it was as big as SAP at the time.
Yeah.
And when I joined Salesforce, it was interesting because they were horizontal cloud platform scaling very rapidly. I joined the commercial business, so I started selling to smaller companies that were in Canada because that's where I was living at the time.
Hmm.
So I remember coming into this role and going from a post-sales role into a pre-sales role. And now I'm in this situation where I'm doing like 20 demos a week to companies across every vertical you can imagine. And it was just like rapid learning, understanding how to sell. It was my first time in a sales facing role. So I
Yeah.
remember I was super nervous when I took that job, and I was talking to my friends about like, I've never done a sales role before. Like, am I going to be good? This is frightening. This is terrifying to me, right? Turned out to be the best move I ever made because I got to understand even better, how do you represent what the customer needs, and having the pre-sales, well, having the post-sales consulting experience, you bring that consultative energy with you into these
Mm.
conversations. And I think customers appreciated that. So fast forward to today, many roles at Salesforce. The last role that I had there, I was the general manager of a product that we launched called the Consumer Goods Cloud. So this is kind of the end of the story arc. I started in CPG software, ended up building a cloud version of the thing that I was building in 2007 at SAP.
Yeah.
And we grew that business, and it was a wonderful experience building it within the company, growing really fast. But one of the things that I experienced when I was doing that was the knowledge within the industry that I was selling into and the teams that sold into that industry. There weren't many domain experts, right? So as an example, I had the only two people in a 75,000 person company that could answer a very specific RFP end to end.
Wow.
The knowledge
End to
bottleneck,
end.
end to end, right? This is specifically for that business process. So, and that to me was just one symptom of what happens in a lot of these organizations. You have knowledge workers that are in these specialized roles that have domain expertise that's not linearly scaled across the org.
Mm.
And at the same time, you've got ChatGPT coming out, the promise of what LLMs could become and how software is going to evolve. So
Mm.
it's very clear to me that this is going to change the dynamic of how you scale knowledge within organizations. And that brings me to Tribble. So I left Salesforce in 2023 to start Tribble. And the thesis there was, hey, this new wave of software is going to look completely different than everything we've done for the last 25 plus years.
Yeah.
And it'll actually change what knowledge work looks like. So how do we start building on that new platform? And then we started building the use cases that we have. So
So there's a number of things in there. One thing you said was really interesting, making the transition from an engineer to a salesperson. Even with your background and your knowledge, your deep knowledge, your expertise, but also the fact that you were on site, you would have been interacting with customers on a regular basis. Can I ask you, what was it that led you to be nervous about sales? Was it a preconditioning thought process there as to what you thought salespeople needed to represent or how they needed to act, or was there something different that was leading to the level of anxiety, if you like?
I think, now that I reflect on it, it was probably a couple of things, right? One, I felt like you had to put yourself out there more,
Yeah.
especially when you're going out there, because you're coming in and you're committing to something. You're making a commitment, but you're also being a consultant and you're selling. And I think to me, the simple view that I had at the time was, hey, you kind of have to say whatever you need to get the deal done. And it's got like this aura of sleaziness to it. And like, I don't know, and it's not like I had any firsthand experience, right? I didn't do it myself. I didn't have any friends that were really good sales. I had a few friends that were really good salespeople, but I didn't consider them to be sleazy. It
Yeah.
was just like this weird preconceived notion. But I think what changed it for me, Darren, was when I thought of it more as a consultant, because I knew how to be a consultant, right? And that was the inflection point for me. I'm like, wait, I'm still just consulting. It's just I'm at a different part of the value chain.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's a really interesting point because one of the things I try to, I guess, not impose, but strongly suggest to salespeople and certainly leaders is you've got to act as a consultant. You're there as a problem solver. You're not there to sell your product. It'd be great if you could sell your product, and yes, you've got to have a huge belief in your product, in your service, and what it can deliver in terms of outcomes for customers. But ultimately, if there's not a fit, if there's not a specific problem that your customer needs or wants to solve, then there's nothing to sell them. But you might actually be planting some seeds for future, but also thinking about who they might know in the industry that may actually have a better fit for what you have to offer. But if you come in and you be that sleazy salesperson and talk about everything you've got, people are just going to put up the barriers, which is where the sales, I guess, generalization comes from. That all salespeople are pushy, they have to be extroverted and stuff like that, which is completely counterintuitive.
Yeah, and Darren, the one thing, and just one thing, like I recollect from these conversations is, I think there were probably situations where being on the post-sales consulting side, I remember being in instances where customers were overpromised things, right? And
Yes.
then as a consultant, you're now building out the delta, or you're bringing them back to reality of expectations versus what the
Mm,
product can actually do. So
yeah.
all of this accrued into like some sort of debt of like what this could be like on the front end and what was actually happening. But I have learned to appreciate over the years that you're you have to help the customer see where you can go, not just give them where things are today,
Mm,
because they're also looking for that from you. It takes
yeah.
time for a deal to close, right? So you
Mm,
cannot be static in your vision. And I
mm.
think all of these things you only get through experience, right? You have to actually try the other side.
Absolutely. And I think your role being embedded within a customer and being a trusted advisor, a consultant, all of a sudden now putting the sales hat on, but still acting as a consultant, you'd built that level of trust up. And so you had a deep level of knowledge about what you were selling. So the level of credibility was there. So you're leading because a lot of things people need to understand as well is customers want to be led. They want to be led and they want to know what the future is going to look like. But is that future still going to be safe with you? Are they going to be in
Right.
good hands? So what's going to happen once a deal is done? Are we still going to see you, Sunil, or are you going to go off and start focusing on the next logo because that's where you're going to be rewarded? So there's a lot to be said for a consultative approach, and I always say to sales teams, the sale doesn't really begin until after the first or second sale is made because that's when you
Mhm.
start starting to be tested. Now, if you've got that level of credibility, chances are your customers are going to keep coming back, but also they're going to start talking to others about your credibility, and that's where the things really hit the mark. So now that you left and you started Tribble. What was it that you saw in the marketplace that was a gap that you felt that you could fill? And was part of that looking into the future in terms of how enterprise sales is going to be done and all the go-to-market processes and certainly with AI coming into it? Was there a specific time when you said, you know what, there's a gap here and I reckon I can fill it? And that's what led to Tribble?
Yeah, I would say it's a little bit. It was a little less of a specific gap that appeared, more of a platform shift I felt happening around me. And the initial vision for the company was like most of these processes will not remain as is. Most of these interface points between teams and humans will all evolve where we will be able to use the machine to do a lot more and get a lot more leverage. And
Hmm.
that will drastically reduce the number of humans in any org.
Yeah,
And of course, the time scales will vary, and like it depends on which process we're talking about, which vertical we're talking about.
yeah,
But to me, that was the underlying platform shift that was happening. And then it brought it back to my experience. It's like, hey, if we're gonna use this technology to solve something, what are some very acute pain points that exist today? And that I go back to my experience. Like that got the RFP example that I gave you. That
yeah.
was just a very clear manifestation. And when we inventoried the market of like technology like this, where could it be applied to create a product that would be a killer product? RFP responses in 2023, the incumbents that were out there that had dominated the market were all
Yeah.
project management software that was created 10 years ago,
Hmm.
right? So we're coming out using the new tech. We're 10 times to 100 times better because we can generate a lot of the responses. We changed the way in which knowledge management is done because you no longer have to create a separate master data system for how you respond to customers. You can just ingest content as it comes from the systems like marketing tools, enablement platforms, help documentation, your CRM, and take it from the source without having to create yet another library that you have to maintain. So
Mm,
these things were innovative in 2023 and they were just completely different from what was out there. So it allowed us to grow really fast.
mm,
But we still stayed true to that vision because now with one process that we've gone after, we've thought about it as, hey, how do you use that trusted base of knowledge, the same information that you would give to your customers to expand that out to the sales team to use across the deal cycle, not
mm.
just when you're responding to an RFP,
Yeah.
right? So I'd say it wasn't a specific gap that brought us out, but that was the first one we attacked. And we've been able to expand faster than you would have 5 years ago because the leverage we get from this technology is amazing.
Mm. Love it. And so when you talk about the life cycle, you mentioned before that originally the two people who could do the RFP from go to woe was the, I guess, the problem or the elixir that started this process. When you now see the whole life cycle of a sales process, um, what is it, and how does Tribble help, say, an enterprise sales leader in their go-to-market, irrespective? And I should ask, are you across multiple different industries? So this is not
Yeah,
industry specific. Okay.
we
So
are.
how does it specifically? So I'm a sales leader sitting in a big enterprise organization somewhere in the world, and I've got a number of different customers. And one of the challenges are we're operating in an environment which is highly competitive. And as we talked about before we press record, with AI, everybody's now the same. There's this sameness
Mhm.
across the world. But I'm looking for how we can differentiate ourselves against our competition to at least give me a little bit of a first mover advantage. So how does Tribble and how does the work that you've done and the business that you've built, I guess, assist in that process?
Yeah, I think a good example would be to talk through kind of a customer and how we've helped solve for this, right? So taking a step back, 2023, when we launched the first version of our product, just using AI to generate responses was revolutionary, right?
Yep.
It was like, wow, this took weeks to do. Now we're doing it in hours. This is absolutely amazing. Massive time savings. But then to your point, right? There's this curse of this, what they call it, the sea of sameness. Everything
Yes.
with AI, right? You go look at LinkedIn right now, you've got people that you've known for 20 plus years that are now posting with emojis. Like, you know what's going on, right? Like that's what I mean. And that's happening at scale, right? So it's happening in LinkedIn, it's happening in emails that are going out to customers, it's happening on copy on websites, and it's happening on RFP responses.
Mhm.
Right. So then to what end, right? What are we doing this for? And part of what we've thought about deeply is how do you use the signals within the organization to understand what influences you to win? So in each one of these dimensions, right? Like the LinkedIn post, what are you doing? You're engineering for engagement. So you have
Yep.
some sort of output metric that you have to measure. And if it's going in that direction, it's fine. Use as many emojis as you want. You're
Mm.
getting the output you're looking for, right? Same thing goes with email. If you're actually getting meetings booked, fantastic. Keep going down that path. For us, it was a little different because the responses were a stage within an opportunity life cycle where you have multiple touch points with the customer from stage one to close. And when you're talking to a health tech selling into the health system whose average deal cycle is 9 to 12 months, it's
Mm.
very different than a tech company that's got a 1 month or 30-day deal cycle and their
Yep.
RFPs like are these little Excel files.
Mm.
But every interaction with the customer counts. Every internal interaction with your product team, your engineering team counts. These are all context that you can use to hone how you respond, but
Mm.
then also coach people in the moment when they're on calls to collect the right data. So part of what we do, we call the product respond and engage.
Mhm.
Respond is everything related to RFP response generation, right? And think of that as a way for us to get really good at the efficiency and how quickly you can get it out, but also tuning responses and learning from them. Did you know that the last 15 you lost all had this specific connector as a feature that you were missing? Or you constantly bullshitted this one response on the last 15, like you do on your typical. You should maybe look at that and talk to your product management team, right? So there's a lot of good work we can do there. On the engage side, we look at it as you're about to walk into a meeting. This is your fifth meeting in a series of meetings for this customer. This is a third opportunity in the life cycle of this account. This is what you need to know. These are your objectives on the call.
Mm.
Then while I'm on the call, it's giving me real coaching in real time as it's listening to the call on what I should be trying to get out of this call. Now, we kind of show this as objectives, like a checklist. As
Yep.
I'm talking to you, it knocks off the checklist. So it's kind of like instead of doing call scoring after the fact, try to change the outcome on the call. And you can do that on every call that occurs. And our idea, when you have respond and engage working together, you can then actually look at the data and say, we actually have a hypothesis on why we think you win. And here's how you replicate that.
Mm.
Right? So that's kind of how we think about overall how we help.
It begs a question then, and we talked about this a little bit before we press record, that I guess the integration of process technology and the human element. So Tribble can do all this fantastic in the moment analysis and identifying this is the path you should be following. You missed this point. This is what you should now ask. This is the process you should go through. This is the next point you should, or the next question you should ask to lead to this. But how much of it relies on the human intelligence of the salesperson? A, paying attention to what Tribble is actually delivering them, and B, being able to articulate that to not only ask the question, but actually understand and be able to process the response from
Yes.
the customer. So, from your perspective, are we seeing that salespeople, quote unquote, need to change in terms of their knowledge base, in terms of their education, in terms of their skill set?
I'll break this into a spectrum of different types of folks and how I think it gives different people leverage, right? So to your, and we were talking about this before recording the call as well. The more tenured reps that are really good, it's much harder to Look, I'll even speak from my perspective, right? And I loved that you showed me a blank sheet of paper in terms of the questions you had prepared for this, because that's how I think about any conversation engagement, especially presentations, right? Like,
Yeah.
don't try to script me. I think the more natural thing will be to actually dynamically figure this out. I
Mm,
think more tenured folks, especially salespeople, will tend to be that way. So when we think about product management, product design, we had to design it in a way where one, for some users, it's literally a post-it list, right? I like to use this analogy where I'm like, if I'm on the phone and I'm talking or I'm placing an order, right? And if it's, whoever, one of my loved ones in the background, and as I'm talking, they're yelling into my ear about what else to ask. I was like, I'm on the phone. Hold on. I'm on the.
yeah.
That's how. But if you come to me when I'm on the phone and you just slide a checklist in front of me, I'll look at you and go, great. And then I'll look at it and I'll try to knock it off.
Yeah.
So that actually is exactly how we design the product. So there's a version of it that will interject and give you information at a higher frequency. Think SDR, BDR, like the type of people that are like, hey, can you just give me the question to ask next? So it's
Mm,
okay, we can do that level of coaching. And then there's the version of it which is very silent and non-invasive and will give you subtle cues. And it's just a checklist. And it's just
yeah.
making sure you can check off the things you can do. So I think you have to calibrate to the type of user. That's how we think about that.
And so with that, it means that the I guess the software and the solutions you're providing become more of an enabler for the sales team and the sales executive rather than letting them run the call without any assistance whatsoever, and certainly without their sales manager looking over their shoulder and critiquing what they're doing, which then helps the sales executive become more relevant in the call because they're being prompted. And presumably this is not something that the customer is going to see. This is something that like a digital post-it note is being placed in front of them to suggest where they could go next based on them based on Tribble analyzing what's going on. So it's preempting, if you like, what could be the next course of action to lead to the outcome that hopefully is a win-win for both the customer and also for you as a salesperson.
Precisely. And turns out when you've trained this thing on all of your RFP data, we know a lot about your product, your go-to-market, how you show up in front of customers, and all the case studies and everything you might need to know offhand. So we
Yeah.
can subtly slide that in front of you when we're hearing the request from the customer.
So this is obviously software that's very geared around people who are doing Zoom calls, Teams calls, phone calls, stuff like that. I'm always curious because I want to bring in AI to this, and I know you use a lot of AI in the solutions that you provide. One of the things I've been fascinated by is, and going back to what you said earlier with the sameness that's out there, doing RFPs and just giving AI the ability to just write stuff, and yeah, it was fantastic. At some point in a sales cycle or in a customer's buying cycle, a sales executive and a sales leader needs to stand in front of a customer and probably pitch, present, and have a conversation, unpack the proposal they've put in place. And my big question mark has always been with use of AI, did the sales or the selling organization pretty much hand over everything to AI and just took what AI gave them as the gospel? And can they stand up in front of a customer and actually explain a solution? Or will they be found out very quickly that, mate, this is AI, this is not your work, is it?
It's funny. I read a post yesterday or a tweet yesterday where it was like 2020 2022 in response to ChatGPT. Oh my God, this thing can help me do my homework. 2026. Oh my God, this thing is doing the job for which I studied. So, so it's like, joking aside, like I think there is some element of like some types of work that if you were simply the purveyor of information and you were just parroting what you learned. Before AI, I remember we used to do stand and delivers, right? We used to put
Yeah.
together pitch decks for our AEs. We used to certify them. We used to make them all stand up and do the pitch deck. But they
Yep.
used to get a talk track and they used to get about 5 slides. I
Mm.
mean, you could argue the talk track, it wasn't AI, it was my team generating it, they were writing it, but they were parroting the talk track. And you could always
Yep.
tell, like some folks would go off and like really go off script, but bring in some story and then they would grok it. And then the others that literally just read it to you and checked minimum requirements.
Yep.
So I think that that translates to reality here as well. Like the
Mm.
people that are really good will get leverage from the tech and they will be really good consultants with their clients and they'll show them how they can help. Whereas the ones that repeat it, I have bad news for you.
And you can now tell that people are putting their ear even closer to their microphone. So, shoot, what's the bad news, Sunil?
Yeah.
They're going to be replaced.
Yeah, that's exactly right, right? So it's like, I think it comes back to, hey, and look, like joking aside, even in my organization, like I'll ask for the non-AI version of the summary on a deal as an example, right? Because
Yeah.
it's very easy to like get caught up and go pull this information from a tool that's all neatly, but it's like, no, tell me what you think.
Mm.
Like, what do you actually think? And I think that critical thought, if you've outsourced it, then you lose everything. You can't have that happen.
And that's what I wanted to sort of hone in on a little bit. And there's a couple of questions around that. But at some point in the sales cycle, there would be a face-to-face interaction. Now, it may not necessarily be on a Zoom. It may actually be if you're in the physical location, you might actually be
Mm.
meeting with the customer in their boardroom, in the executive office, wherever. Um, how can Tribble potentially help with that, or does it sort of stop at the electronic interaction like we're doing today, and you've then got to take that information, and this is where the human element really comes into it.
I think the human element never leaves, but that is one place where I think you're now moving away from the digital. So look, from a technology standpoint, what do we do? Well, we also have a mobile app and you can run it live in the meeting. Yeah, it would be very distracting if I'm staring at my phone when you're looked right in front of me,
Your little
right?
little
But
CIA earpiece that's talking to you.
exactly. So we don't encourage that you do that, but we do record it for the sake of having the context of what transpired in the meeting so you can debrief later and that kind of stuff.
Yeah,
The other thing that we do is we also generate content. So, for example, in that meeting, you might be going to the presentation to present to the customer. So,
yeah.
Dribble will actually help you generate the deck, taking into account every previous interaction and what needs to be said here. And that's something that you can take with you. But once again, you have to prepare and understand that it's put out something and understand what it is you're telling your customer, right? So there's no replacement for that. But I
Mm,
think that's the handoff from the digital to the physical world, and then you come back to the digital world, and
yeah.
you continue with as much context as you can.
I love that. And what we're saying here is because I'd love to ask you also about how you see the future. So you mentioned 2022, ChatGPT can do my homework, but 2026 is like, oh my God, what can it do? What's going to happen in 2030? But it's really important that the human element stays because at the end of the day, and there's research recently that one of my friends out of the UK, sort of the US, did where overwhelmingly at the B2B executive level, even in the world of AI, human interaction is still going to be at the executive level one of the most important differentiators. So we're not saying AI is going to necessarily take over all of the selling cycle or all of the buying process, but it certainly will supplement what's being done. But there'll still be a human to human interaction. But what we're saying is the technology and certainly what you guys are doing at Tribble can, for all intents and purposes, shorten the buying cycle because you've got so much information that's now becoming a lot more targeted and a lot more relevant to mean that, excuse me, as a sales executive or a sales leader, I'm now being more targeted and more relevant to my customer, which should hit the pain points that they have that they need to solve.
Precisely. I think buying cycle shrinking, and you'll be beholden to whatever the procurement cycles look like for your type of product. And we won't purport to say that it'll shrink your sales cycle time, but you will show up prepared. You will show up what you consider to be best in class. All the
Yeah.
dollars spent on enablement, execution, playbooks. How do you how do you enforce some level of consistency in the organization? How do you measure and correct more real time than after the fact, right?
Mm.
These are the kinds of things that I think will come out as benefits. But really, to your point about the human touch, and we were talking about this before we started the recording. I was mentioning like, if you asked me 5 years ago, like, hey, what would be some of the first jobs to go, i.e., your ChatGPT 2026, right? I would have put sales up there as something that, would have been automated to some degree, but I think that's actually one of the last things to go because you cannot replicate a conversation that you and I can have over a dinner
Yeah.
very easily, right? And a lot of things that are being put out in the digital world, like when you look at some of the stuff with these AI videos that you can generate with actors, it's really hard to tell from the difference from reality. Pretty much all digital events will go to zero in value. I mean, zero is a really strong statement, but they will be extremely commoditized. So then
Yes.
it's like physical in real world events, like a dinner, like a, event when you get together, like a conference. These things are actually going to go up in value. And
Mm.
that is where, deals get done, business gets done, right? So that was like the non-intuitive thing that's emerged. And that's like now it's very obvious to me that that's going to last.
It's fascinating, actually, Sunil, because it was only about 2 weeks ago. I'm just talking about LinkedIn. I saw a post on LinkedIn where an executive of a SaaS organization was sharing a story where she'd actually been pitched, I think she said, by 23 different potential vendors, all of them very customized. It was proactive outreach, all done on LinkedIn, but it was obvious that it was all done by AI. It was
Mm.
personalized. And to her, it was all the same, right? Some of it was individualized, but it was the same. The 24th person did something really radical and actually called her, picked up the phone and had an analog conversation. And that was the one that piqued her interest, and that was the one that got traction. So what you're saying is, I think is 100% that in the world of AI, because I want to talk to you about how you see the future in the next 4 or 5 years as well. In the world of AI, if you can be a good human that differentiates and show that you truly care and can build those relationships that are genuine, then that's going to be the differentiation. Because people are going to want to crave connection in such a connected world, which, by the way,
Mhm.
we're so disconnected and have been more disconnected than ever before in history.
I think so, man. One of the campaigns that I heard of recently that had a lot of success. I think this was a company trying to sell to like telco executives, if I wasn't
Okay.
mistaken, in the US. But basically, they were just trying to break through the noise. Like, how am I going to get a C-suite at a large company? You can't send them a LinkedIn connection request. They're not going to respond to you, right? That's the worst possible strategy on the planet. So these guys basically sent them all cell phones and they FedEx it to them in this interesting packaging. They open it up, it's a phone. And after they grab the phone starts ringing. They take the call. Loaded cost of like maybe, but it's like $800 for lead acquisition for a
Yeah,
CXO at a Fortune, 1000 company. That's actually a pretty good ROI if you can get the meeting, right? So you're
totally.
exactly right. I think that's what it's going to take, right, to
Mm.
break through the noise. And yeah, it's just an interesting time to try to solve this stuff.
Amazing, amazing. So, looking forward, you mentioned ChatGPT 2022 versus ChatGPT 2026, and I'm sure in the next 4 or 5 years, there's going to be a heap of other AI organizations that are going to, come up and take over. Let's talk about 2030, and I no doubt that as the founder of Tribble, you'll be already planning what you think the world's going to look like and what sort of role you're going to play in it. What does 2030 look like from your perspective, from a technology and a selling point of view? But also, if you put your mind out a little bit further, say 2035, what are you seeing? Is it something that's filled with excitement? Is it something that it's filled with uncertainty? What are you seeing? What's your prediction based on you work in this industry daily?
Look, I'll speak in my perspective broadly of like I think what's happening with technological improvement, which is unprecedented at rates that we've never seen in our lives before. Like even what we get numb to in like a 6 month period today compared to what we experienced 20 years ago
Mm.
is absolutely insane. In fact, probably the last 6 months have been more than the 20 years combined before in terms of how much advancement each of these models in like every domain. I basically have a playlist of completely AI generated music. I can't tell the difference between real music. It's phenomenal. It's
Wow.
blending it's like dishes that you would blend like with Jamaican food and Italian food. It's not a real dish, but maybe you like that taste specific to you, you can make it. Music is now the same way. I can take themes and things that I like and mix them and get output that I want. So all of a sudden I'm listening to that kind of playlist. You can generate videos of things that are seemingly completely real looking. You can't tell the difference between reality. And that's all happened in the last 6 months,
Mm.
right? And like 6 months before that, there's like this joke on the internet, like if you go and look for Will Smith eating spaghetti, that seems to be the benchmark of how good AI is at generating video. Just 3 years ago, if you look at this thing, it is an ungodly abomination of a video. Like you would be, it's disgusting, right? Like it's really weird. And you look at the latest version of that from 2 weeks ago, and you're like, that's Will Smith eating spaghetti. Like that's actually him, right? So all that to say, this stuff is moving really fast. And I think it continues to accelerate. Now, what does that mean for companies and people like us that are running businesses, but also larger enterprises, I think the gap between what's available outside and what is available inside is growing exponentially. And I think that folks like us are helping fill the gap of taking the outside stuff, making it into products, and then giving it to people on the inside. Historically, that's how we've always done it. And that's what innovation is. But that gap is growing exponentially. So that means the opportunity is growing. And I think it also is a reality check for the companies to be able to absorb this stuff quicker, right? If you
Mm,
don't, the new companies that are born with the new stuff, and they will compete with you on those economics. That's not good, right? So
mm,
there is an impetus to change, but there is also just the I think the reality of how quickly organizations can absorb this kind of stuff. Um, and I think these dynamics are all interesting because I think about 2030. Okay, that's 4 years from now. When I started Tribble in 2023, in my mind, this stuff was moving so fast, I would assume organizations would catch up fast. I'm still seeing inbound requests from customers that look exactly the same way as 2023, even
right.
though in those 3 years, Will Smith has started eating spaghetti, right? Like, so that improvement outside doesn't manifest the same rate on the inside. So I
Mm,
think what that means for companies like us is, and we talked about this earlier, there's a component of change management. Okay, like what version of what's outside is coming in? How do you get the teams ready for it? How do you properly set up the jobs to be done by the people that are still in the
mm,
company? And how do you roll this stuff out? And then there's the piece of, hey, like who actually understands what's happening outside at a fast enough speed to bring it inside? And like how do we raise the competency inside?
mm,
I think that differential, although it grows, there's just a massive opportunity to diffuse it into the economy. And companies like us are in a position to be able to get it in there and continue to grow. I'm not a doomer that, like everyone loses their job. Like I actually think humans are going to make it really painful to fire them. They're not going to just
mm.
go easily. So we're going to make it very difficult. So you got to bring along a lot of people for the ride until you get to some point in the near future or far future where the economics of it just snap and then it's like a different question, right? But I think we're far from that.
It's interesting because as you were talking, part of me was thinking, well, how quickly do organizations, which by the way are an amalgamation of humans within the organization, so you've got this thinking process, how much of it is the humans within the organizations embracing or at least understanding what's happening outside so they can bring it in, and will they be taken over by the technology and they'll be left behind. So how do we continue to become relevant? And I think it's a question for a lot of senior executives in organizations, particularly from their go-to-market, is how do we continue to become relevant? How do we keep up, or in many cases, try to leap ahead of our competitors so that we at least have a little bit of an advantage for a short period of time before the technology
Mm,
keeps up? That's always going to be the challenge. And from my point of view, I think that humans will always be involved in the selling process because at the end of the day, we want to do a piece of business, particularly big business, with humans because it's not just the transaction, it's what happens before the transaction, through the transaction, and specifically after the transaction. So in
hmm.
the B2B space, we want to have life cycle management, not just transactional management of a product or a service. But it's a challenge. So I'm sure you dealing with lots of executives around industry, they're grappling with how do we continue to embrace technology? You might have some of those organizations that are stuck in 2023. And when I say stuck, it's only
Hmm.
3 years ago, right? But for some, it's like 30 years ago because the
Yeah.
technology is speeding up so quickly. So, in your role, how much of it is not just giving people access to the technology and helping them to use it, but how much of is your role education on preparing these executives and these organizations for the future that perhaps they can't see yet?
I think every business case we do has some element of this baked in, right? If you think about your growth plan for the next 2 to 3 years and you think about how much capacity you're adding, and specifically in sales, producing like quota carrying heads versus support. This is actually a good point. So technical support resources, right? Like
Hmm.
SEs or resources that are higher cost, that's some ratio, leverage ratio. Well, if you look at your growth plan and you haven't adopted tech and you look at your growth plan and you have, your curves are a little bit different.
Yeah.
And that area under the delta between the curves is basically your margin improvement by actually adopting the technology earlier on.
Mm.
And you improve your margin operating efficiency then the competitors that have already adopted the technology are not going to run laps around you with, you know, 40 or 50% the number of humans. And I think that that's how you help them see it, because they're still planning the way that they do. They still run the business the way that they do. And you could have these conversations about, oh yeah, it's going to come and take your jobs. But that's actually the way to look at it, which is, hey, it's not a zero sum environment. We're all growing. The economy is
Yeah.
growing. Like, the market is, I don't subscribe to this like, hey, it's zero sum, which then means you're still going to grow. The question is, how much more efficiently can you grow? And
Mm.
how fast can you grow more efficiently? And I think that's the way, you help educate customers, because then
Mm.
you have to let them see like how it fits into the way they were thinking about things.
Yeah. Yeah. And from a human perspective, I reckon that just like the Industrial Revolution created a whole new marketplace for humans and employment, I reckon AI is going to do the same thing. So we're not going to necessarily give over everything to the machine, but there'll be people that needs there'll be new roles. There'll be new roles created, and there'll be new roles created in sales, and they might be something completely different in terms of the titles, but
Hmm.
they'll be needed because we still want to create that human connection and human interaction. Mate, great conversation. Thank you so much. I know you've got a pressing engagement because there's an 18-month-old that's going to, you said, is going to be knocking on the door and say, Dad, come and spend some time with me. Really enjoy this conversation. For people listening in, Sunil, where's the best place for them to firstly connect with you, but also learn more about the great work that you're doing at Tribble?
Yeah, so you can visit us at tribble.ai, and you can shoot me an email at sunil@tribble.ai, and I'd be happy to chat with you. Love to geek out about this stuff.
Awesome. Awesome. And of course, because we're operating in a global economy, you run a global organization. So even people that listen to this that are down under in Australia, highly recommend you get in contact with Sunil. So final question, my friend. Is there something that is still top of mind that we haven't covered that is worth putting out there for people to plug into, whether that be a piece of advice, a piece of guidance, or something that they need to consider looking forward over, say, the next 12 to 24 months?
If you haven't played with the latest models or experienced them firsthand, and you haven't really pushed the limits of what they can do, I highly encourage you to continuously do that, because if
Mm.
you form an intuition about what's about to come, you will feel comfortable using it to your advantage. And I say this to everyone, my loved ones, my employees, everyone. I think it's
Yeah.
just crucial that we feel what's coming in
Mm.
order to be prepared for it, because
Yeah.
otherwise it'll catch you off guard.
Yeah. I love that. I love that. So experiment, right? And go and try and create not just Will Smith eating spaghetti, maybe Donald Trump eating spaghetti. I don't know. Something else. The
Indeed. Make a better
technology is
benchmark.
amazing. Absolutely. Hey, Sunil, it's been an absolute pleasure having you in the podcast. All the best. I know the organization is quite new in its evolution, but you're doing great work, and all the best to you and the team as you continue to expand and hopefully conquer the world.
Thanks, Darren.
Appreciate it, mate. All the best.
Yeah.
Thank you for listening to the Exceptional Sales Leader podcast. I trust the information in this episode has been helpful in your journey towards becoming exceptional. And remember, please take the time to rate the show, subscribe to the show so other people can find it. But also, if I can help you, jump on my calendar, go to leadwithdarren.com, and let's have a conversation about how I can help you along your journey to being exceptional.